Good morning, friends. It is such a pleasure to be with you today. I have a platform. I've written a book. I have a podcast. I get to speak a lot, and I thought a lot about what I should say to you. A lot of people already know what I have to say. And as I thought today, there's a message that I felt was appropriate for this group. And that's what I want to talk about today. So about 2 months ago, I'm working on the second book. I've been working on it for over a year about my mom having dementia, and it's just not working out right. I just can't figure it out. And so I asked my friend Charlie to give me a blessing. And Charlie came over on a Sunday morning and gave me a blessing. And in the middle of the blessing, he paused and he said, "Ben, God wants you to know that you are enough." Now, if you know me, you know that kind of message annoys me. I don't like being told you are loved. I don't like being told you are enough, because I just naturally have a lot of confidence. That's a message I feel like I already have internalized. So being told that to me, it just isn't my favorite thing. And so after the blessing, Charlie and I then talked about the blessing. And he said this, and he explained to me, he said, "This is what I experienced as I was giving you the blessing, the message I was trying to communicate." He said that he saw this stream of fast-moving, shallow water that I was standing in. And next to that was this deep well of slow-moving water that represented the love of God that I was just dipping my toe in. And that I was spending too much time in this shallow, fast-moving water and not enough time in this deep water, this deep well of water of the love of God. And I thought, well, I got to, and then he said this. He said, "Ben, you are very accomplished. You have a PhD. You've written a book. We have a podcast. You're handsome and charismatic. And if you didn't have all those things, God would still love you, and you would be enough. Do you know that?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to lose all those things to find out that God still loves me." And so I started off on a little quest to figure out how I could get into that deep love of God, spend more time in that deep well of water. And as I was praying and pondering about this a lot, just a week later, I was a guest on the Sunday and Monday podcast hosted by my friend Tammy Hall. And in the middle of this, we started talking about this, and Tammy said, "A parable just came to my mind that we have to talk about." And so we turned to Matthew 20 and read the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. And that is my message today to you. So what happens in this parable? There's a man who runs a vineyard, and he calls workers into his vineyard at 6 a.m., at 9 a.m., at noon, at 3 p.m., and then at 5 p.m., with just an hour left in the day, he calls some more laborers. And it's interesting. He goes to these people who aren't laboring. He says, "Why are you standing here idle?" And they said, "Because no one has asked us to work." And then he says, "I will call you to work." And they work for just 1 hour. And then at the end of the day, the people who worked for 1 hour, the people who worked for 3 hours, and the people who worked for 12 hours, they all got 1 penny. They all got the same thing. Now, parables can mean a lot of different things in different situations and different circumstances. So I'm not going to say this is for sure what this parable means, but this is what has come to mean to me. That it doesn't matter if we work in the vineyard for 80 years or 8 minutes, we will all get a penny. And that penny is the love and the grace of God. That is what we will get when we start laboring in the vineyard. Now, as I thought of this parable, I thought about people who have labored in the vineyard. And I think the labor is to do the 2 great commandments, to love God and to love our fellow man. And those are big commandments. Those are big invitations that we put into practice in a lot of different ways. And so I've been pondering about people that I've seen labor in the vineyard, especially in this LGBTQ Latter-day Saint space, to show their love of God and their love of men. And I've thought about 80 stories I'm going to share, and I'm just going to share a few stories of people laboring in the vineyard. When I was just 4 years old, Carolyn Pearson published a book called Goodbye, I Love You, about her relationship with her son, or with her husband, Gerald, who happened to be gay, how they got divorced, and then he contracted AIDS and she took care of him in his final months. This book was written when I was just 4 years old, and I came across it when I was 24, 20 years later, and I read it. There was not a lot of material about being LGBTQ in the church at the time, and so I read that book, and I didn't see myself in Gerald a lot. I didn't really see myself like her husband. I felt like our lives and our paths were pretty different. But there were 2 parts of her book that really meant the world to me. There's a little poem she wrote that she shared in the book that I then memorized, and it elicits sits a candle, she said, and it says, I dim, I have no doubt. If someone blew, I would go out. And then she adds the next stanza, I did not. I must be brighter than I thought. And I remember reading that and thinking, I felt that way too. That if someone just blew a little bit, I would go out. But I will not, because I'm stronger than I thought. And then as I kept reading, when she was taking care of her husband who was gay and had AIDS, she shared this little story about sisters from the Relief Society bringing food and casseroles over to her house. And she said they didn't understand what we were going through, but they knew that we needed help and they could feed us. And I wept reading that, because I thought that's what my community is like. They might not understand, but when we need help, they will be there. I learned as I was reading that book that Carolyn Pearson had written this musical in the 80s called My Turn on Earth, which as a kid was my very favorite cassette. And I could probably still sing every single word of every song from that. And this woman who I haven't met had such a big impact on my life, and she'd been laboring for so long. Now, as I've been involved in this space for a lot of years now, I talk to so many people who say, I read Carolyn Pearson's book in the 80s and the 90s, and it changed my heart, and it changed my life. She was laboring in the vineyard when I was just a kid. Now, at the same time, Tom Christofferson came out to his family, and they didn't quite know what to do. And if you've read his book and know his story, you know what Sister Christofferson did. She taught her family that there was nothing that any of them could do, especially their brother Tom, that could take them out of the circle of their family's love. Now, that was a story that only the family knew for decades, but that was laboring in the vineyard. And that sent out ripples of love for generations. Now, sometimes people will write a book that decades later will mean something, and someone will say something to a family that will be meaningful as well, and that is laboring in the vineyard. I felt my call to labor in this vineyard in the fall of 2013. I got an email from the BYU Alumni Association requesting stories of alumni and experiences that they'd had at BYU. And I felt this sudden tug to write the story of me coming out to my two best friends while I was a BYU student. So I wrote this essay that I thought was really good, and I submitted it to the contest, and it promptly lost. And I thought, well, okay, well, at least I wrote it. And then as I came out to about 100 people over the next year, I shared that essay with my friends as I would come out to them. I thought, oh, well, maybe that's why I was supposed to write it. And then a year after writing it, I felt this pull to publish it on my blog, which was a very scary thing to do. And then I ended up publishing this essay, and it got thousands of reads in just a few days. And I thought, this is actually kind of neat, because maybe a few dozen people would have read it in this BYU Studies journal, but now a lot of people are reading it on the internet, and that was really cool. But I immediately started to get connected to other people who were in this space. Now, I published my blog post in January of 2015. And I was just brand new to being out. It was a scary thing. And I found out about the All Arizona Conference that was happening just 2 hours north of where I was living in Tucson. It was happening in Mesa, Arizona, and I wanted to go. But even though I was out, even though thousands of people had already read my story, I was scared to go. And I talked to my friend Diana, and I said, I think I might go to this conference. And she said, can I go with you? And I said, that'd be so nice. Like, I would love that. And so she took a whole Saturday to drive up to Mesa with me and to go to this conference. And I remember so clearly her sitting next to me as speakers were talking, and she would lean over and she would say, is that what you have felt like? Is that what you've experienced? Does that resonate with you? And I kept saying, yes, yes, yes. And then when we got back to my car, I said, Diana, what did you think about this this conference that we just went to? And she said, I need to think for a minute. And then we drove to Cafe Rio, as one does in Mesa. And then I asked her again, and she started crying. And she said, I had no idea what you all are going through, and I'm so sorry. It shouldn't be like this. She was laboring in the vineyard just by being with me on that day, and that meant so much to me. Now, my coming out and my sharing my story, I think it happened at the right time. I think me doing it at 30 was the right time, because I love attention. I love being noticed. I love getting to speak, and I love attention. And when I came out publicly at the age of 30, it wasn't because I wanted attention. It was because I wanted to teach people. I wanted to teach them about my love of God. I wanted to teach them about how they could better love people. And there's this thing that I've learned, and I learned this from the Apostle Thomas, not Thomas S. Monson, but Thomas from the Bible. Thomas, he's known for one thing, and that's for doubting. But before he doubted, Jesus said he was going to go to Jerusalem and he was going to die. And Thomas said, if you are going to Jerusalem to die, we will go and we will die with you. Now that is loyalty, saying I'm going to go with you no matter what happens. And then when Thomas doubted, he said he wouldn't believe until he felt the prints of the nails in Jesus' hands and the wound in his side. He wasn't going to believe until he felt the wounds. Now, part of me sharing my story was I wanted people to get to feel my wounds and see the things that had been hard for me and the ways I'd been hurt and damaged. And as that happened, I saw that people's hearts changed. And as I've gotten to be close to and touch other people and feel their wounds, I've also learned truths that I didn't know before. Now, from time to time, as I let people feel my wounds, they hurt me more. But that is a small price to pay for the amount of good that has happened as I've let people see my wounds and feel them, and as I've gotten to feel the wounds in other people's hands and side. Because in this world, we all get wounded and we all get broken. I just want to share a few more examples of people who are laboring the vineyard. I talked about people at the beginning of the day. I've been doing this for about 7 or 8 years now, and I just see so many people who want to love God and who want to serve their fellow men, and who just feel called to be in this space. So there's so many stories I could share, but I'm so proud of my friends, the Holtries and the Skinners in Sacramento. This little group they started to just help people know that they're loved and have a place. Just a few weeks ago, I was in St. George with my friends, the Sorensens, and they said, Ben, while you're here, we should have a little gathering. So I just posted on Instagram, we're going to do this little gathering for LGBTQ folks and their families, and 38 people showed up. And I thought we were just going to have a social, but it was very clear that people wanted to talk. And so we all sat in a circle in a room, and we talked for about an hour, and there were tears, and there were laughter, and the Spirit of God was there. And I mentioned in that meeting that I had recently this summer gone on a trip to Europe. And I had a great time in Europe, but I had more fun in that room sitting with people, talking about our loved ones, talking about our experiences as LGBTQ Latter-day Saints and families, because the Spirit of God was there and the love of God was there. Now, I have just one more story that I want to share about someone working and laboring in the vineyard, and this just happened last Wednesday. So last Wednesday was my last day at BYU. It was a chaotic day. There was too much I had to do. I had to pack up my office, which I still haven't done all the way, and there was just so much to do. And after coming from a meeting with HR where I had to sign some forms, I came back to my office, and as I was walking up the stairs to my office, the student said to me, "Are you Ben Schilaty?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Well, I'm coming to see you." And then she told me how her mom had seen on Instagram that it was my last day at BYU, and she said, "If you go talk to Ben today, I will buy you a Jamba Juice." And it was about 3:30. I had to turn in my key at 5. I did not have time to talk to her. And so she came in my office. She told me that she's not very out. She's told some friends and her mom, and we talked. And after about a half an hour, I said, "Thank you so much for coming. I have to let you go because I have some things I have to do." And she left. And as I've thought about that is laboring in the vineyard. And why is it laboring in the vineyard? Because she believed that things could be better, and that maybe just coming and talking to me, things could be a little bit better. And just having hope is part of laboring in the vineyard. So I want to end by going back to where I started, to this standing in this fast-moving, shallow water and this deep water that represents the love of God. And this is what I've learned, and this is what I've learned about what it means to labor in the vineyard. That when we labor in the vineyard, we grow. We don't just grow plants, but we grow ourselves. We get to work shoulder to shoulder with the best people in the world. And if we want to feel God's love, we need to be where He is. And where is He? He's laboring with us in the vineyard. And so I invite all of you to think about how God is calling you to labor in the vineyard. And I don't know what that'll look like, but the call is to do this, to love God and to love our fellow man. And as we do that, we will feel his deep love. And my testimony, and I have seen this again and again and again, is that God called some laborers at 6 a.m., he called some at 9 a.m., he called some at noon, and he even called some at the 11th hour. And he is calling more and more and more of us to show our love for him and to show our love for our fellow men. And what that labor for you will look like, I don't know, but we are all being called to labor in the vineyard. And I share that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.